Larry had a very good right hand. He moved quite well. He never gets set to hit him because he always moving. Larry left hand like most guys right hand. Very, very good boxer. I knew Larry was gonna be a tough fight for me.
Angelo Dundee knew that I could whoop Muhammad Ali, that he ain't had a chance because I was his sparring partner.
You see that thumbnail, Roberto Durán and Sugar Ray Leonard sitting on a podcast, and the words "he was smart" are burning across the screen in red. They are not talking about Tyson. They are not talking about Ali. They are talking about Larry Holmes. And that single image tells you more about the problem than any argument ever could. Because smart should not be a surprise. Smart should be the first thing anyone says when that name comes up. But for decades, it was not. Larry Holmes spent most of his career being invisible. He dominated the heavyweight division for 7.5 years. He won 48 fights in a row before a single loss. He made 20 straight title defenses. He outlasted legends and dismantled prospects well into his 40s. And still, when people list the greatest heavyweights who ever lived, his name gets skipped over like a footnote between two chapters that mattered more. He was sandwiched between the charisma of Muhammad Ali and the destruction of Mike Tyson. And somehow, in the space between those two giants, history nearly forgot him. If you are feeling this story already, hit the hype button and hype this video up. Because Larry Holmes deserves every word of what is coming. Here is the truth. Holmes was not underrated because he was less skilled than Ali or Tyson. He was underrated because he was not flashy. He did not float like Ali or explode like Tyson. He was a craftsman, a professional, a man who solved every problem in front of him with precision and patience. And that word, smart, is exactly where we need to begin. Let us talk about the jab. Because if you want to understand Larry Holmes at all, you have to understand what that left hand meant to him and what it meant to every opponent who ever walked into the ring with him. Most heavyweights use the jab to measure distance. They flick it out to keep an opponent honest, to buy a little space, maybe set something else up. Holmes did not think that way. For him, the jab was everything. It was his main offense, his main defense, the control panel for the entire fight. He used it to control where opponents stood, what they could see, and how and when they could attack. No heavyweight before him, and arguably none since, has weaponized that single punch the way Holmes did. The story behind the jab makes it even more remarkable. Early in his career, Holmes suffered a serious injury to his right hand. While it healed, he had nothing to fall back on but the left. So he worked it. Hour after hour, day after day, for thousands of repetitions in the gym, he threw that left hand until it was something entirely different from what any trainer would have designed on purpose. What started as a forced adaptation became his greatest advantage. Holmes described the mechanics of his jab like this. Keep the hand loose until the very last instant, like the snap of a wet towel. Then, in the millisecond before impact, tighten the fist and turn it over so the knuckles land clean. That loose to tight movement is why opponents could never time it. There was no telegraph, no wind-up, no warning. Just a hand arriving in your face before your brain registered that it had left his shoulder. He did not use one jab. He used 4, and each one served a different purpose. The slap jab was the fastest version, loose at the wrist, snapping outward along a curving trajectory. It was not built to hurt. It was built to disrupt rhythm and blur vision. Opponents could not see past it, which meant they could not see the right hand that Holmes was always loading behind it. The piston jab was the damaged jab, full extension, stiff arm, driving forward with the shoulder behind it. This one reset distance created space and left marks that built up over 12 rounds. The double and triple jab came in rapid succession, fired from the shoulder with almost no break between them. 3 jabs in a row overwhelm a tight guard and crack it open. Then the right hand walks straight through the gap. The rangefinder was the quietest of the 4. A light flicker to the forehead, not hard enough to hurt anything, but precise enough to measure distance and set Holmes's feet for whatever came next. Together, those 4 variations gave Holmes total control of a fight. He could blind you, hurt you, overwhelm your guard, or simply measure you at will. And because the jab was always flickering in his opponent's vision, it hid the right hand behind it like a curtain in front of a door. The clearest proof of what that jab could do came in 1982 against Randall Tex Cobb. Holmes jabbed him for 15 consecutive rounds with such absolute control that the fight was never competitive for a single moment. It was so one-sided that broadcaster Howard Cosell retired from boxing commentary in disgust at what he was watching. Cosell could not stay in the booth, but that jab did not come from a gym alone. It was forged in a place called Deer Lake. Between 1972 and 1975, Larry Holmes was Muhammad Ali's primary sparring partner. He lived at Ali's training camp in Deer Lake, Pennsylvania, inside the machine that produced the greatest heavyweight in history. He trained there for an entire year without receiving a paycheck, believing the education was worth more than any salary. Ali was not kind to him in the ring. That was never the arrangement. Ali would try to hit and hurt Holmes in sparring to keep himself sharp and maintain his aura. During one exchange, Ali landed a shot that closed Holmes's eye completely. Holmes wore that black eye with pride. To him, it was proof that he belonged in the same ring as the greatest boxer who ever lived. What Holmes absorbed during those 3 years went well beyond on footwork and punching. He learned the psychology of the ring. He learned how to talk during a fight, how to get inside an opponent's head, how to use words and posture to make someone doubt themselves before the first punch was thrown. He learned how to move laterally, how to angle off and make power punches miss by inches instead of feet. He watched Ali dismantle elite opponents with movement and timing, and he studied every single detail. When Holmes finally left to build his own career in 1975, he carried all of that with him, but he added something Ali did not always apply: discipline. Ali was a showman who took calculated risks that sometimes backfired. Holmes took the same athletic intelligence and installed it into a tighter, more controlled structure. He had Ali's movement, but the defensive fundamentals of a classical stand-up boxer underneath it. That combination would make him nearly impossible to beat for the next decade. By 1978, Holmes had run up 26 straight professional wins and earned a shot at the WBC heavyweight title against Ken Norton. Norton was not a stepping stone. Norton had broken Muhammad Ali's jaw in their first fight together. He had pushed Ali to his absolute limit across 3 legendary contests. He was a powerful, experienced, deeply dangerous champion who had seen everything the heavyweight division had to offer. Nobody was walking into that fight with an easy night ahead of them. The first 14 rounds were a tactical war. Both men probed and tested without giving anything away. Then the 15th round happened, and those 3 minutes became part of boxing history. Both fighters stood in the center of the ring, feet planted, and traded the hardest punches they had without clinching and without backing down. No dancing, no holding. Just 2 men deciding the title with everything they had left. Holmes was 6 years younger than Norton. In those final 3 minutes, that margin showed in hand speed and punch volume. When the scorecards came in, 2 of the 3 judges had Holmes winning by 143 to 142, the closest possible margin on a boxing scorecard. But the numbers are not what defined that fight. What defined it was that Holmes was willing to stand in the center of the ring in the final round of a title fight and trade bombs with a man who had already broken the jaw of Muhammad Ali. That is not a skill. That is heart. Pure championship will. Norton himself would later say that Holmes' desire to win was simply too strong to stop. Holmes walked out of the arena as the new heavyweight champion of the world, and then the test got harder. In 1979, Ernie Shavers walked across from him. There was a specific kind of reputation that followed Shavers everywhere he went. Mike Tyson, who knew a thing or two about punching power, called him one of the hardest hitters he ever saw. Holmes said the same thing. Boxing historians said the same thing. Shavers was not just powerful. He was the kind of powerful that changed the course of a fight in a single moment, regardless of what was happening before it. In the 7th round, Shavers landed an overhand right on Holmes that sent him crashing to the canvas. 40 million people watching on ABS television saw it happen. The fight looked finished. Holmes admitted afterward that he was not fully conscious when he hit the floor. He said the punch was like lightning and that he heard a saxophonist playing in his head. He only came back to full awareness when his back hit the ring canvas beneath him. What happened next is something coaches still study. Holmes got to his feet, cleared his head in a matter of seconds, and used his jab and footwork to survive the rest of the round. He did not panic. He did not grab and hold and wait for the bell. He reset. Then, over the following rounds, he began methodically taking Shavers apart, using the jab to control distance and breaking his opponent down until the fight was stopped in the 11th round. Holmes had absorbed the hardest punch one of the hardest punchers alive could throw, been knocked briefly unconscious, and come back to win by technical knockout. That kind of recovery cannot be coached into a fighter. Either you have it or you do not. Holmes had it. The October 2nd, 1980 fight between Holmes and Muhammad Ali remains one of the most emotionally difficult nights in the history of boxing. Ali was 38 and severely diminished. The medication he was on had caused heat exhaustion and sapped his strength. He had no reflexes, no legs, no defensive timing. Everyone in the building could see it from the opening bell. Holmes was at the peak of his career, and the man standing across from him was his teacher, his mentor, the person who had shaped the core of what he was as a fighter. One observer described the fight as watching an autopsy on a man who was still alive. Holmes dominated every single round. He jabbed, he combined, and Ali offered nothing in return. Multiple times during the later rounds, Holmes looked toward Ali's corner and toward the referee, slowing his own attack and silently asking for the fight to be stopped. He did not want to do more damage than he already had. After round 10, Angelo Dundee walked into the ring. The fight was over. It was the first and only time in Muhammad Ali's entire career that he was stopped by a corner or a referee. Holmes won. He was flawless, and the public made him the villain for it. The sentiment was so heavily in Ali's favor that Holmes was cast as the man who had hurt a legend, despite the fact that he had done nothing except what every champion is expected to do. He had gone out and won. That cost him popularity he never fully recovered, but he said you do what you must do. The 1982 defense against Jerry Cooney arrived in a cloud of something bigger and uglier than boxing. Cooney had been promoted using heavy racial overtones. He was marketed as the Great White Hope and appeared on the cover of Time magazine despite never having competed for a world title before. Each fighter received $10 million. The atmosphere was charged with enough tension that snipers were positioned on the roof of Caesar's palace during the fight. Cooney was a genuine threat. He was 6 feet 6 inches, physically powerful, and carrying a left hook that had destroyed Ken Norton in under a minute. Holmes had to be smart and he had to be calm. He used lateral movement to stay outside the range of Cooney's left hook, giving it no clean angles to land. The constant jab disrupted Cooney's rhythm and prevented him from planting his feet for his biggest shots. Holmes knocked Cooney down in the second round and kept applying pressure until the fight was stopped in round 13. The aftermath became something both men were proud of. Despite the bitter and divisive promotion that surrounded it, Holmes and Cooney became lifelong friends. Cooney later said that losing to a true champion like Larry Holmes was the greatest achievement of his entire boxing career. A man who lost the biggest fight of his life walked away with that level of respect for the man who beat him. That is the truest kind of testament. In the mid-1980s, Holmes dropped 2 consecutive decision losses to Michael Spinks. Both results were controversial and hotly debated. Holmes believed he had won both nights. The scorecard said otherwise, and he stepped away from boxing for 2 years. He came back in 1988 at the age of 38 to face Mike Tyson, then the most feared heavyweight alive. The fight lasted 4 rounds and ended with the only cold knockout of Holmes's 75-fight career. Years later, Tyson was consistent and clear. He had fought an old version of Holmes, not the prime. A prime Larry Holmes, Tyson said, would have been a nightmare for any heavyweight in history. Holmes, for his part, said Tyson's right hand hit so hard it should be illegal. That looked like the end. It was not. In 1992, at 42 years old, Larry Holmes agreed to fight Ray Mercer. Mercer was undefeated, an Olympic gold medalist, and was viewed across the sport as the next great heavyweight in the making. Holmes was listed as a 4-1 underdog. The fight was billed as a stepping stone for Mercer, a routine win on his path toward a title shot. Holmes refused to cooperate with that plan. His legs were not what they had been at 28. He could not move the way he had moved against Norton or Cooney, so he used his brain instead. He leaned against the ropes and made Mercer's punches slide off angles, absorbing and countering the same way Ali had once done against George Foreman. He used veteran positioning to take the sting out of Mercer's power. He kept that jab working, precise and sharp, picking up rounds one at a time. When the final bell rang, the judges gave it to Holmes unanimously. It stands today as one of the most stunning upsets in heavyweight history, and it proved that the foundation Holmes had built was so solid, so intelligent, and so sound that it could overcome the physical advantages of a younger, world-class athlete, even when Holmes was well past his prime. Now look at the record that career produced. Holmes made 20 consecutive title defenses, the second highest total in heavyweight history behind only Joe Louis, who made 25. He stands ahead of Muhammad Ali's 19. He started his career with 48 consecutive wins, just one short of Rocky Marciano's perfect 49-0 record. He scored 44 career knockouts from 1973 to 2002, 29 years as a professional fighter. His style has been called future-proof. His 6 feet 3 inches frame at 220 pounds, an 81-inch reach, and elite hand speed would challenge any heavyweight in any era. He is regularly placed in the top 5 heavyweights of all time, alongside Ali, Joe Louis, Jack Johnson, and Lennox Lewis. The reason he was underrated during his prime is straightforward. He did not entertain the way Ali entertained. He did not terrify the way Tyson terrified. He worked, executed, and won. And the public often mistakes the absence of drama for the absence of greatness. But the fighters who faced him never made that mistake. Norton respected his will. Cooney admired his championship character. Tyson praised his prime. Larry Holmes was not a bridge between 2 eras. He was a heavyweight legend who spent a decade proving that smart beats everything else, and who spent the rest of his life proving he was right. He was smart is exactly the right phrase. It always has been.